MIT says 95% of AI projects fail, and after 12 years consulting inside Fortune 500 and 100 companies across cyber, cloud, and automation, I can tell you exactly why. It's not the tech. It's teams trying to automate processes that they haven't taken the time to understand. Most companies start their AI strategy at roundtables in a room full of opinions and politics, and then they wonder why they burn 500K in failed pilots. In this video, I'm going to give you a roadmap that your business can use to actually get you off the ground the right way. Or if you're an aspiring consultant, this will give you something to sell. So let's get into it. So we're going to get into a practical example very soon. There's just a few slides I need to set up in place so that you can understand the problem, and I can then walk you through the solution. So there are 3 points to our problem. The first one being is that a lot of companies are starting with AI roundtables. And that's essentially where a bunch of leaders get in a room, they put their hands up and guess where AI should be implemented in the business based on their end goals or something they've seen. The second thing is that they buy the solutions first. So again, you see something awesome on YouTube or LinkedIn or whatever. Somebody's doing something that you think is going to help your team, and you go and buy the solution before understanding your actual processes. And the third thing is that they skip the audit. Another word for that is that they're just not looking at implementing strategy. And that's a massive problem, because if we build our house on broken foundations, eventually it's just going to topple over. And the result of this is that tons of money, time, and effort are wasted, and people end up thinking that AI just doesn't work. 95% of companies are actually doing this based on what MIT put out, Atlassian put out something, Gartner put out something. Everybody's doing studies into why AI is not working, and they all seem to have the same fundamental problem. But first, we need to understand why roundtables don't work. So it comes from a really good place of heart. Everybody gets together in a room, you have the smartest people in the business all coming together on a table, and you discuss this AI strategy to build a consensus that everyone agrees upon where the business should be heading with AI. But the problem with that is that it's built on your opinions. It's not built on objective data. And you couldn't possibly build something that lasts a long time if it's built on opinion instead of objective data. So AI roundtables, you generally have sales teams who want things being automated. They're prospecting, their lead generation. And it makes complete sense, because if you can save a salesperson 4 hours a day, they can focus on actually picking up the phone and making the sale. So that makes logical sense. Next, you have marketing. They might want to automate their copywriting so that people can just film their videos, get them on YouTube or put them on LinkedIn, whatever it is that they're doing. Again, makes complete sense. And ops want workflow optimization. All of that makes logical sense. It focuses on the end goal. But there are tons of problems with that, because apart from it just being opinion-based or seeing something that you think matches your target, people don't look at the underlying processes, and they don't honestly assess whether their processes are broken before we even look at the AI. So you don't have the real data of what's actually happening under the hood. I mean, could you imagine a whole bunch of people walking into a room, 10 leaders, some of them egoic, putting their hand up and saying, well, one of the biggest problems in my team is that we take 3 days to hand things back to the sales team. So we're at fault there, and we should totally fix this first before we implement AI. I don't think any leader on any planet would say something like that, because most of them, again, are so focused on their end goals. Some of them are egoic and don't believe that they could possibly cause a problem. And some people just genuinely don't understand that they need to look under the hood. Because to them, AI is just this messiah that's going to make everything better for everyone by doing things automatically. That's the human dream, right? But it's the biggest problem, because the real mistake is that implementing AI without understanding your current processes leads to failure. As we can see from this example, one of my friends, about 1.5 years ago, he went on a project. Before it was cool to do this kind of stuff and it was everywhere, he was building a sales prospecting tool based on what the team thought they needed. And he was also doing a whole sales team overhaul amongst automating a whole bunch of stuff. It was a 65K project. It increased the speed to lead massively, but they saw no return on investment. You might be asking yourself why at this point. And some of you might even be catching on, because it's pretty clear. The handover between sales and delivery was terrible. So sales increased their output because they had automatic prospecting. They could get to people a lot faster. But the problem was they were just handing more things over to delivery, who were overworked, understaffed, and they already had a broken process because they couldn't possibly fulfill that many requests in that amount of time. So all they did was speed up the waste. But then there was more. Legal kept sending back contracts that either had typos, spelling mistakes, or things that should have been removed at the client's request that weren't. So that also slowed things down. And then thirdly, HR didn't onboard the contractors fast enough to get the project done. So support had a ton of issues as well, because they had to keep supporting this project that was understaffed. So you can see it didn't matter how much effort they put into trying to get this ROI for the business, because it made sense for them, right? We need to increase our sales to make more money, because that's the best thing to do when you're a business. But no, just like what every report says, You need to fix the boring back-end stuff, which are these 3 points that would have saved their ROI from that project that he was doing. So they automated a broken process, and it just failed twice as fast. And that's where the Atom framework comes in, which is from Atomic Ops, my company. And this is something I've done over the last 12 years, regardless of whatever tech we used. I think a lot over the years, the tech changes, but the processes are always the same. So whether you're in cybersecurity, if you're doing cloud or DevOps, and now automation, it's always started with an audit. You always look at the strategy behind why we're about to do this big change in the company that we're about to do. So in the sense of AI, we're mapping what actually happens when we go through a workflow. Say a sales team is reaching out to someone, we would sit with someone and figure out exactly what they're doing step by step so that we can see what happens. We can see if delivery takes 3 days to hand something over before we bother wasting time putting AI on that. Then once we have the strategy, we look at the transformation. So we design our AI enhanced processes around that strategy that we have now built. Then we look at optimization, and that's training the team on real usage. Because think about it, these first 2 things are completely irrelevant if nobody adopts the tools that we're using. So we really focus on getting the users to adopt what we build in this step. And then finally, we move on to maintenance. This is something that a lot of people don't focus on. They don't think about it, to be honest, but you really need observability because the models change, performance changes, prompts change, the way that we structure our adoption for our teams change over time. And if you're not maintaining that along with the processes that you do, you're going to fall behind. You're going to waste money. Things will fail and you'll never know about it without observability. So there are tons of reasons why we do these things. And if you look on my channel, I have videos on all of this stuff so you can figure out how to do it within your company, or if you're a consultant, you can figure out how to sell this to a company by watching those videos. But the point is that having a framework like this is the kind of thing that will set you up for success because everything is logical and leads to the next step with pure clarity. And that's what we need when we're trying to deliver a project successfully. So a couple of more slides and then we'll dive into the workflow canvas. So when we're delivering AI readiness or an audit, whatever you want to call it, what you actually want to do is start with the process mapping. Now, any business that you have, they're going to have these 4 lanes. They have the acquisition, which is how they get customers. They have delivery, which is how they fulfill to their customers. They have support, which is how they handle the problems when they come to the company. And then internal ops, which sits on the back end and kind of brings all of these teams together to get the thing done so they're like one cohesive unit. Then what you're going to do is you're going to interview a bunch of stakeholders and people that are actually on the ground. You're going to tag every single step along the way and actually map out what they're doing to try and figure out where the time, the quality, or compliance risks are. Then you're going to have an opportunity matrix that is actually grounded in reality. And finally, you're going to calculate some ROI based on all of the stuff that you have put together. So that's the high level process that we look at. Cool. So here we are at the overview, which looks like a kind of hot mess at the moment, but we'll zoom on into each section and I will walk you through how this process actually works. So we've done our interviews. We interviewed 2 sets of people. First, we're going to interview the stakeholders, which are C-level people potentially, heads of department, that sort of thing. For this use case, we'll talk about sales. So I might go to VP of sales, or I might go to director of sales, whoever it is in the organization, and I'll get their point of view on wherever it is that they want to go. Because you have to understand that their vision for whatever it is their team doing is completely different to the people on the ground actually doing the work. And we need to understand to some degree where that disconnect is, because some leaders don't even know that their teams have problems. They would say, oh no, our sales team is amazing at what they do. But the reality is that the sales team might fucking hate them, and they might hate the work that they do because they have work silos, they don't have the tools that they need, and a whole bunch of other things going on. And that's a massively common problem that I see in a lot of places. So you really need to make sure that you interview both people to understand where both of them stand, but also to try and get a holistic view of where the company is headed, where this specific department is headed. So the kind of questions that you would want to ask a stakeholder is something like, if I could wave a magic wand, what would be the biggest problem that we remove this year? You might want to ask them what their goals are for this quarter or for the end of the year. I'll put some questions in the description below that you could use when you're going through this process. But at a high level, you want to focus on the strategy tailored towards the audience. He's not going to walk you through a workflow. That's the second person that you're going to interview. That's usually the people on the ground. So again, with a sales team analogy, you're going to be looking at SDRs or salespeople, whatever, and you're going to go through their process with them. You'd sit them down, ask them a few questions from their perspective, and then you would say, okay, cool. Now walk me through your exact process from start to finish, end to end, what it looks like when you're reaching out to clients, when you're doing your lead gen, when you're getting hold of them on the phone, stuff like that. And after you've done that, ideally you've sat down with them, you're going to end up with this canvas that we're looking at the top over here in blue. So what I've got over here, this is just a dummy workflow based on my workflow for outputting YouTube videos when I first started out. So I've tailored it around content marketing here because this is obviously inbound. So if we focus our analogy on here, we've got the acquisition process. Again, if you remember, we have the 4 engines, we had the acquisition. So this is how we get our clients, one of the methods. And what I've done here is I've mapped out my entire workflow and put a whole bunch of shiny dots everywhere that nobody understands at this point. And we're going to look into what each of these things mean. So we have our legend here. We have time sinks, wait handoff, quality risk, and compliance or data risk. And imagine I've sat down with a person now and they have walked me through their entire process. So you can see here, it's pretty straightforward. It's just blocks of each step that the person takes. Literally, you need to get them to walk this through with you. Don't get them to tell it to you because people often forget things, even if it's a micro step. You need to understand it. And then what we do here is we put little step cards underneath each thing. And it tells us what systems are they using for this specific step? What inputs do they put in? And what do they expect out of this thing as a result of whatever it is they're doing? How often does this happen? We have volume. The doing time, how long does this take? The wait queue time. So if you're handing this off to someone, how long does it take to get it back? Or if you're using a system, how long does it take to process? Stuff like that. What is the error and rework rate? 5% in this case. Is there an SLA, which is a service level agreement? Any data sensitivity, that kind of thing tells you if there's a compliance risk or something that could cost you a lot of money if it goes wrong. And then finally, what controls are in place. So this could be a security system or it could be a person that has to sign something off, whatever. Get the point. Cool. So these little step cards are super important because this is what gives us our data about what actually causes the problems in our workflows. If we look at it from this perspective, just for this little snippet of me creating the initial video content, I've got 4 steps and each of them are taking a ton of time. So that takes an hour, that takes 10 minutes. Cool, that's not a lot of time. That's 1 to 2 hours, and that's another 1 to 2 hours. So realistically, we're looking at about 5 hours, give or take, just to do a video, which is to pick 3 ideas and then sift it down to 1 video. So that is a shit ton of time just to do something. And, you know, if you calculate my time and how much it's worth and blah, 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 it ends up being a lot of money. But from the perspective of a business, if they're doing this, it can be even more money because it could be multiple people involved. But the point being is these step cards, they reveal the pain, they reveal the problems that you have with each of these steps. So then what we do is we look at them and we think rationally, should ideation take an hour? That sounds like a time sink. So put a little ball over there. Pick 3 ideas, 10 minutes. Could ask myself, do I even need that step? Then the next one, this one also takes 1 to 2 hours. So that looks like a time sink, but then equally it could be a quality risk. And the same thing for the last step in this process. So now we know that we have some massive pain here that needs to be addressed. It's marked down clearly, and we can start brainstorming some ideas of how we can actually get this to be better. Now, at this point, a lot of people would think, okay, cool, we're just going to throw AI onto it because AI makes sense in this case. We've now identified this pain and it needs AI. But that's not entirely true because there's one more little framework that we need to look at before we do that. And that's QDOAA, which is question, delete, optimize, accelerate, and then automate. And the reason that we do this is because a lot of the time you don't even need AI in place before you're doing something. So the first step of this is to question everything. If I look at someone's workflow, if they walk me through something, I'm not going to look at it and say, okay, cool, we can put AI here, 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 and here. I'm going to look at it and I'm going to be like, okay, why are these steps here in the first place? Do you need to have 4 steps in order to create 1 video? Probably not. So how can we make that into 1 or 2 steps before we even add AI? How can you simplify this is the point that we're trying to make. Because a lot of people, they've had processes for so long, no one's ever questioned why you did it in the first place. Why didn't anyone make it better before AI came along? And that's again where the problem starts, is they're going to throw AI onto something expecting this massive return when you don't even need to spend money on the AI in order to get the return in the first place. So it's really important to focus on that. But then to make it more efficient, you just delete a bunch of stuff that doesn't actually need to be in this process in the first place. Then you optimize it. So how can we make it better without any AI in the first place? And then accelerate it. What can we do to make it faster? What can we do to make it better without adding more people before adding AI? And then once you've done all of that stuff and you've exhausted any part of that, then you add the AI. And the reason that I like to take that approach is that you've literally got the most efficient workflow process that you possibly could have before you've even added AI. which means it's going to be cheaper to add AI, which means it's going to be more performant to add AI. And it sets the business up for a larger form of success than if they just did the best they could manually and then added AI to it. So you can see here, based on whatever it is that I put together here, my logical conclusion, obviously, was that this needs to be turned into some form of agentic workflow, because there's no need for me to have every single one of these steps, because I'm wasting time and quality and a whole bunch of other stuff. And I was already using AI, but I had them in 3 different places, when instead I just needed one place to do everything for me and have a single workflow that can review itself before I add the human in the loop. Because human in the loop is super important here. You can't possibly do everything without having humans in here. I don't want my content to be robotic, so I make a shell and the rest I just fill in or wing it at the time of recording, stuff like that, human in the loop. So I'm not going to walk through this whole thing just for the sake of the video, but you get the point. What I've done through the entire process is applied this. I have mapped time sinks, quality risks, compliant issues. I've marked handover things where I hand over things to my editor, and then I would drop off and go and look at his workflow. And how optimized is that one? How long is he spending doing X, Y, Z? Can we make it faster? Can we make it better? Cool, we've done that. Now, can we add AI on top of that to make you even faster? And something that you need to keep in mind with these workflows is that no matter how amazing you make your workflow, every single workflow is going to have a keystone. And a keystone is that if this breaks or if this doesn't work, nothing in this entire workflow matters at all. So in the case of making content, if my thumbnails are not good and my titles aren't good, no one's going to watch my video, which means me investing in AI over here, me writing all these scripts and filming these videos, if no one ever watches them, it's all completely pointless. And no one is ever going to watch them if I don't get really good at making thumbnails and titles and spreading the word. So again, that's something that we map during this entire process. In sales, if you're sending cold DMs, it's probably going to be the subject line, because if you don't make an enticing subject line, no one's going to open the email, in which case your cold email campaign is pointless. So super important to focus on this approach. You can see I prefer to take an approach where I don't even look at the AI first. I just look at the process, see how well we can make it perform without AI, and then find opportunities to implement AI. So once we've done that, we come on down to our table over here. And this is where we have the quadrant of high effort, low impact, and high impact. And it's pretty important to map these things out because it shows you where you can get your quick wins and where you're going to look at your longer term AI processes. So the things that we deprioritize: high effort, low impact. There's no point in doing that stuff because you're not going to get a massive return on investment. The nice to haves are low effort and low impact. You don't really need to focus on those unless you've completely exhausted everything else and you're just looking for something else to do at this point. But where you're going to get most of your money back is obviously on the quick wins, which are your high impact, low effort. So these are things that are going to be 90 days or less to do. And then the big swings, which are your high impact and high effort. So these are really beneficial to the business, but they take a lot longer to do. So you can see in this one, it was investigate team workflows, which was a super low effort thing to do, but then also build an automated workflow for scripting. And it ended up being an entirely different process where I cut down this massive thing into these few little steps over here by deleting a whole bunch of stuff and just doing things like saving automatically to the cloud so I didn't have to upload to my editor, and a whole bunch of things I did manually that didn't require AI, which again aligns with my philosophy. So now we know where our big swings are and we know where our quick wins are. We know what we want to focus on. If you're trying to get immediate ROI for a business, you want to be focusing on the quick wins. It's pretty obvious at this point. Anything that takes less than 90 days, fix it as fast as possible. And for the love of God, don't try and do this to your entire company at the same time. Don't go to every department and say, we're shaking things up like the Gestapo walking into a business. That's not what we want to do here, because it scares people. It makes them think they're going to lose their jobs and a whole bunch of other weird stuff. Focus on one department, because then you can see how this process works within your business. But also, if you focus on, again, let's just use sales as an example here. If you focus on that and you see a ton of bleeding workflows, you can fix those first. And you can get the ROI a lot faster than instead of doing the whole business all at the same time, where that would be a much longer project, which means you would take a lot longer to see that return. So focus on your quick wins, because this is where you're going to get the most impact from whatever it is you're doing as fast as possible. So then finally, what we need to do here is we need to look at how all of this forms into some form of numbers, because there are people in businesses who obviously want to know how much this is going to cost, what is going to be their return on investment, and all of those things, so that they know whether it's worth investing in. And that's the entire point of doing all of this, because we've now built this objective data, we have this strategic plan, we've identified our quick wins, and we understand that for this content marketing workflow, we've done everything we can, and all that's left to do is build an automated workflow for as much of it as possible. But we need to understand if it's actually worthwhile investing in that versus just currently doing whatever it is that we're doing manually. So what you would do is you would try and quantify their pain points as much as possible. To a business, money loss equals pain, amongst a whole bunch of other things that you can also put in here. But for the most part, we're going to focus on money in this example. Now, these are just arbitrary numbers. Don't take them as gospel, but they're here to prove a point. So say you're producing 4 videos a month. Your content marketer costs $4K a month. Your editor is $400 a month. Thumbnail designer is $150. Your hourly value as a person, or the people who are behind the team or behind the camera, per video is $500. Your total hours spent per video, 5 or 6 hours. Again, currently in this manual state. Percentage of time that's automatable, 0.4. Average revenue per video, 3,000. Implementation cost, 1,500. Cool. So that kind of builds our baseline. But what we ideally want to end up with is this final metric where everything that we show them shows them that doing this thing is a no-brainer. So we've identified all of their pain points from a logical perspective. We built their strategy, and then we show the people who care about how much money they're going to make or save exactly why this is a valid investment. We've shown them how much time they're going to save. We've shown them how much money we're going to save. We've shown them how much errors we've removed from their workflows. We've shown them how much compliance risks they're going to avoid. Because if you think about adding that into a perspective of whatever your workflow might be, a single compliance risk costs a business over 500K. So if your system completely eradicates that possibility, you've saved them 500K that year. So you would put it on there. If you're talking about sales in this instance, if you have a sales guy who closes one more deal as a result of your prospecting tool, you've made them a ton of money, especially if the LTV of that client over a year is 960K. So you've got to look at all of the things from that perspective, factor it in, and build the ROI around it. And ultimately, that's how you're going to deliver some form of strategy to these people, something that makes sense to them, something tangible that they can look at and say, well, this makes complete sense. If we don't invest in this now, then we are bad at business. That's ideally where you want to get your customers to. Having this holistic picture where they're no longer sitting at this round table with people putting their hands up thinking what could be good for a business. They know objectively what is going to be amazing for their business, how quickly they can get the easy things done, how long the bigger things are going to take, and they see the return on investment that you're going to get from each thing that you implement within the business. And then the amazing thing is, after you've shown them all of this stuff, you can actually go and implement it for them. You can architect the entire solution, which is a whole phase 2 of the project. You get to train their team on the tools that you build, and they have the confidence that the tools that you built them are actually built on strategy, and their team has the confidence in you because you built the tools for them. And then finally, you bake in some form of observability so that you can monitor their whole environment and show them why it's actually working, how much time you've saved them, how much money you've saved them from, again, an objective point of view with the observability baked in. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell. If you're a business and you want us to implement this for you, check out the description below to find a link to get in touch with me. Otherwise, check out the videos on the screen right now. They will definitely help your business or your consulting journey. Leave some comments below and I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.